What is the burden of proof in criminal court? Imagine being accused of a crime and having to prove your innocence. It sounds unfair, right? But in criminal court, the rules are clear about who must prove what. The burden of proof is the responsibility the prosecution has to show that the defendant committed the crime. This is a key part of how justice works. The defendant is considered innocent until proven guilty. This principle protects people from wrongful convictions and makes sure the legal process is fair. The standard of proof in criminal cases is called beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the highest level of proof used in any court. It means the evidence must be so convincing that there is no reasonable doubt in a typical person's mind that the defendant is guilty. It doesn't mean absolute certainty, but it does mean that any doubt must not be reasonable based on the evidence presented. If there is any reasonable doubt, the jury must find the defendant not guilty. In civil cases, the standard is lower, called preponderance of the evidence. That means it only has to be more likely than not that something is true. But in criminal cases, the stakes are much higher. A guilty verdict can lead to jail time, fines, or a criminal record. That's why the law demands the prosecution meet this high standard. Many legal mistakes happen because people misunderstand the burden of proof. Some think they need to prove they are innocent. But in reality, the defendant does not have to prove anything unless they raise a specific legal defense. Even then, the main burden remains with the prosecution. Another mistake is thinking that any tiny doubt means the defendant should be found not guilty. But the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, not just any doubt. Jurors are told to decide if they are firmly convinced of guilt, not if they are completely certain. Sometimes defendants or their lawyers don't challenge the prosecution's evidence enough. They can point out inconsistencies, weaknesses, or lack of proof. But they do not have to prove who else might have committed the crime. Their job is to question whether the prosecution has met its burden. Knowing about the burden of proof helps defendants and lawyers make smarter decisions. It guides whether to testify, what evidence to present, and how to cross-examine witnesses. If the prosecution has not proved every element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant should consider raising that issue. Working closely with a lawyer is essential to ensure the prosecution is held to its burden at every step. This includes filing motions to dismiss if the evidence is weak, choosing jurors carefully, and making strong closing arguments. Mistakes happen when defendants forget who has the responsibility to prove what. Remember, the prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant does not need to prove innocence. Focus on whether the evidence has serious flaws or gaps. Make sure the jury understands that reasonable doubt is the standard they must apply. This knowledge helps protect your rights and make sure the case is fair.